Hi everyone, welcome to the Movieception Show. My name is Fariba, and for just a little bit, I wanted to give my time to give a review of the new movie that's now in theaters. It's The Devil Wears Prada 2. It's a film that's making a lot of money, and I figured, I actually should dedicate a little bit of time for this just because the first movie has a special place in my heart. Now, I think the best way to really start off this review is to just share my experience watching the original movie because I feel like that plays a key part in my general view. So now the movie itself came back in 2006. So I was probably around 8, 9 years old when the first movie came out. So of course I didn't watch it immediately. Now, of course, for those who may or may not know, for a lot of these films, they do end up, syndicated on like these network channels like FX, TBS, TNT. So at some point, I probably would have caught The Devil Wears Prada on one of those channels. And I'm not gonna lie, I actually was hooked. I did watch majority of the movie. But it didn't become a special movie for me, not until much, much later when I got older. I started to kind of realize what it's like to be, an adult. And I would say maybe by the time I got to like high school or even in college, that I really started to really acknowledge how special the Double Wears Prada movie was because one, it's very iconic. I think every time you're watching this movie, there's so many great things about him. You have this really feisty girl boss, Miranda Priestley, who, is a no-nonsense boss. Then you have a character like Andy, who is very naive, but you see quite a huge transformation with her. Then you have this English assistant played by Emily Blunt, who happens to have some of the most iconic lines. Like she is again another so-called no nonsense, someone who's a little bit very cocky, very confident. I really love about that. And then you have someone like Stanley Tucci's character is Nigel, who happens to kind of, even though he tries to not butt into matters, he's someone who's always there to really back people up. And so a film like The Devil Wears Prada started to become something that became, a film that was living rent free in my mind. Like I'm not even joking when I say that occasionally what I would do is I would start thinking about the movie. There would probably be like certain moments where I'm like, oh my God, like this was such a great moment. And I will probably like go on Google or YouTube. I'll search for that specific scene and rewatch it just simply because of how, iconic it is. And again, it's not the most perfect film. I'll admit to that. Like, I would say once we get to like Paris and then we have like little bits of those, that's where I would say like maybe the pacing gets a little bit off. But the first two acts, I mean, again, it's a subjective thing, but in my opinion, are honestly near perfect because everything about it is just so intriguing. And now, of course, I say this as somebody who's not the most fashion forward person. Like, I think this was like the first time that I actually saw a movie that was really, focusing on the fashion. And I'm not the most fashionistic person, but even then, just watching a movie like The Devil Wears Prada, it makes you want to rethink about your own fashion style. And I think with a character like Andy, I think what makes her such a great character is simply for the fact that she's in a way a representation of us as like normal working class people, somebody who's again going to workplace for the first time straight off of college, trying to make a name for themselves, and then just seeing what the real world is like, whether it be because of Miranda or just seeing what's happening around. And I think because of that, the first movie has been a movie that's really touched a lot of people, especially a lot of ladies, which of course, when we were hearing about the fact that there was going to be a sequel. I think the sequel was announced back in 2024. I think a lot of us were absolutely stunned because I think there had been a lot of rumors, reports that, they've been trying to develop a sequel. Now, of course, the movie itself is based on the book, which the person actually happens to have worked with Anna Wintour. So there's a lot of inspiration with that. And I think there was a sequel to that novel, but I don't think they ever really got to it because, I think some of the cast members were either hesitant or they didn't just approve the script. So it took a long time. It took 2 decades to get a sequel. And I think in a way that worked in its favor because and I'll talk about more of this in this review, but it worked in a favor because we kind of that allows the film to then just showcase how much the world has changed since 2006. I mean, what's so insane is that, The Devil Wears Prada, even though it came out in 2006, it's still a movie that a lot of us, still resonate with. I mean, yes, this is a film that was before smartphones became a thing. It's kind of insane because you keep watching the movie, because I actually did rewatch it. I was watching it and I realized that they still had, like, the flip phones, they still had, like, the sliding phones, which I actually had one of those when I was in middle school, and then just to see the fact that we don't have those kinds of phones, it's like, "Oh, okay, you can see it's still a dated film," but even then, it's a movie that has aged so graciously. Let's be honest, it aged so graciously in a way because someone like me who's an adult now can now understand a lot of the message, the themes of The Devil Wears Prada, which again, is why I was so excited to see this sequel. Now, let's get right down into this movie itself, the new movie that just came out about a couple days ago. I actually saw it on Thursday night, of course. I mean, again, that's something that I always do. That's like literally my tradition. I always watch movies on Thursdays. So I got to see the film this past Thursday, and I'll say, generally speaking, I enjoyed it. I think it was a very good movie. There's some things that worked, but I also met some things that did not work. And if you were to ask me, like, which one I would consider to be the better movie, the first one, the second one, I would still advocate for the fact that the first one is a lot better, and there's a key reason why. Now, let's actually talk about the good parts of this movie. Now, as someone like me who actually, works in journalism in a sense, one of the things I would say is maybe the strongest point of this movie is the overall plot, the main plot, which is surprising enough, the fact that, the story follows the fact that the world has changed. The world has changed in the last 20 years. We're no longer, doing a whole lot of these print-based material content. They're not selling as much. We're now living in a world where technology has evolved. People are more focused on the influencing culture, the fact that people are now getting a little bit more access to stories and materials, which means that everything's basically internet based. And for someone like me who has been witnessing how the media industry has changed, I was honestly shocked how deep into this film that they were going to focus on that aspect of it. Now, as I said, like, if you're not, as aware of what's happening in the media industry, you'll probably be, I'll tell you right now that, every so while I'll be reading these stories about how so and so outlet has laid off this many writers and editors, or so and so outlet had to let go of these people because of the fact that they just don't have the budget for those things. I mean, this is a very common thing, and it's actually hitting very hard in the media industry. So the fact that this movie focuses on the eroding status of journalism and the media industry, I was honestly very stunned. I was like, I didn't realize how much of this movie was going to be very focused on a social commentary of that, how art has been declining, how media has been declining, how journalism has been declining, all because of the fact that the world has really changed in the way that it's focused on things. And nowadays, it's like it's not just simply putting out the content, the material, but what can actually bring the most clicks, right? I think the more I kept seeing that, the more I was absolutely stunned. And I was like, looking left and right, and I was like questioning, is this a movie or is this a documentary that we're seeing? But I do give props for the fact that, with the story that they had in mind and the fact that the premise and the overall plot was focused on that really carried the movie from A to Z. And I think with that, at least blueprint, that allowed the movie to really flow very well. Again, it had a really strong social commentary, and it was very relevant. It was really relevant to what's happening in the real world as someone like me who has been witnessing it. And it doesn't have to necessarily be just focused on what's happening in the media industry, but it's like something that a lot of industries are dealing with right now. And so I really applaud the fact that this is a story that they took, that, it very much deviates from the novel itself, because the novel, I think, goes in a whole different direction. Because again, there are a couple of book sequels after The Devil Wears Prada, but this movie is entirely its own identity, and that identity is really taking inspiration of what's happening in the real world and applying it here, because I feel like that would be the best way to do it. And I think they took the right approach for that. And I think because of that, I think the movie itself really works in a more general sense of resolving what the main conflict is, which is the fact that they're dealing with the fact that Runway is no longer this really respected print-based company that it used to be, or when I mean by company, I mean by brand. And instead, it's now having to try and catch up with the world and develop a much different audience that is very focused on, what will catch your eye rather than what actually is a very good story. And so that's something that, again, I feel like was a really bold attempt. It worked out very well. And I think that allowed some things to really work in a way that really stuns you and also makes you appreciate why this movie took this stance. And again, it helps trying to develop the rest of the film from A to Z. Now, I will also say there are a lot of fan services, there are a lot of gimmicks, there are a lot of callbacks to the first movie. And I have to say, like, I mean, they start off like that right away. Like from the first scene, you can catch a lot of moments from the first movie, which I will say I actually liked. I clocked it. I was like, oh, I remember this movie. I remember this part from the first movie. And even though there are a couple of fan services and, callbacks to the first movie, what I did appreciate the fact is that they didn't compromise the quality of the story. It never had an impact on it. It was just a quick, catch that you had, and that was about it. And thankfully, again, it never really impacted the viewing experience of the movie itself. So there's one thing with that. Um, Now let's talk about why specifically I find that the first film is better than the second film, and it has to deal with the actual individual stories in the movie. Now, what I really loved about the first movie is the fact that yes, there is some pacing issue, but it doesn't take away the fact that what made the movie so special is because of the characters and how much, the characters have involved, how much the characters have kept to themselves, how much we see a little bit of the nuances and subtleties with, who they are, especially with someone like Miranda, where even though she comes off as someone who's very fierce, who really keeps a wall between her and her coworkers, we've even seen moments where she does have her vulnerable moments and really lets her guard down, especially in that one case where she had that divorce and, talks about it with Andy. And yet and she's still being the Miranda, right? She's like, oh, like, of course not. Like, why would I skip my dinner? Like, if she's still Miranda, even though we still see a lot of nuances with that. And again, a lot of that comes down to Meryl Streep's performance. So, one with that. But with this sequel, I would say that I think the weaker point is the fact that the actual character arcs are a little bit boring, a little bit bland. They're not as well developed as they were in the original movie. Like Miranda's maybe the one case where I would say, why she seemed a little bit different is very natural just because of the fact that the world has evolved a lot. It's not, like a lot of things that she used to do in 2006 is not acceptable in 2026, which is like, okay, that's so understandable why she's a lot more quiet in this movie. Why, we're really stunned with the fact that she isn't like three steps forward, like how she used to be in the first movie. And I would say, at least, I think with Andy, like just as she was a representation of us as a character in the first film, I think any time that we see Andy kind of just talking and expressing and reacting to moments, I think she's a representation of us just looking at Miranda. And it's like, are we joking? Is this this is the Miranda we're seeing? And so again, applause to Meryl Streep. I mean, once again, just really showcasing a side of Miranda that is still true to herself, but also that is a little bit more shocking in a way that we never would have imagined. So, but even that being the case, we don't really see a whole lot going on with her arc. Like there's a little bit of like details here and there about like what her motivation is, but even beyond that, we don't really see a whole lot beyond like what we've seen with her character. I would say even the bigger offense is really how they develop Andy Sachs' character played by Anne Hathaway. Now, what I really loved about Andy's story in the first film is that she is someone who is naive. She's young. She is somebody that is really getting into the workplace for the first time and realizing what the reality is like to work in places like this. And even though she was a little bit, too soft and naive with like approaching to the fashion world that she had no reason to be in, right? The fact that she transforms so much from beginning to the end, and you can see there's like a spontaneity with how she's reacting to things. That's what I really liked about the movie. Is the fact that she is really adapting to what's happening throughout the movie, and because of that, like you can see how much her story really transforms from beginning to the end. And I think that's what really, and that's why her arc was so strong, simply for the fact that we see how she changes from A to Z. And unfortunately, with the sequel, we don't really see a whole lot of that. Now, again, this is a character who has, defended Miranda, and that's been very clear. She has defended Miranda. She even got to the point saying that if she was a man, people will not say anything, and think she has a valid reason to say that. And so I think because of that, she is a defender of Miranda. But even that being the case, she never, I think by the time we got to the end of the movie, she realized what her mistakes were, and she realized that, she didn't want to compromise her own self if it meant that she would have to give up her integrity, her relationships that she's had. Like, she didn't want any of that, right? And so because of that, she decided to step away from that world and go in her own direction. I think that's what made that movie so great, is because she's developed her own identity. Whereas here it's like her identity is just not really to be found, or isn't as reflective of what we saw from the first movie to here. She's just kind of there in a way that she is supporting Miranda, and she's always supporting Miranda from A to Z. And I think that's what seemed a little bit off, because there are moments that we do see of Andy, but then it's like we haven't seen the side of Andy where she starts to take things into her own hands. And I think that's what made her character arc a little bit boring, bland, very out of touch with what she should be from what we saw her from the first film. I will say though, if there's one thing I was a little bit annoyed with, is the fact that we saw so much hand gestures from Anne Hathaway, and I was like, I don't remember Andy having, all these hand movements in the first movie. I wonder where that came from. And I know I'm doing like hand gestures now, but that's just how I do it with my reviews. But that was just something that I found a little bit odd. I'm like, I don't remember doing this many hand gestures, but that's just like a nitpicky thing, I guess. But even that being the case, I think the biggest offense is the fact that Andy's actual character arc just seemed very boring. She didn't really have a whole lot going on. She wasn't as spontaneous as she was in the first film. And the thing is that there was actually one way that the story could have been a little bit juicier, since they were hinting at the fact that Andy was trying to create this book, or trying to, write this book based on her, experiences, in a sense exposing Miranda, which if you think about it, it's a little bit benda, because that's like what happened like with the actual book itself. Like, the Devil Wears Prada is based on the fact that this person worked with Anna Winters, and therefore she decided to make a book about it. So I was like, oh, this is a really meta thing. And I thought maybe they're going to develop something out of that, and maybe that's where we get to see some of the more juicy bits with Andy. But it never really went through a whole lot. Like, it was just kind of there and mentioned, and then mentioned again, and then just was like, okay, we're not gonna do it. And now this is not a spoiler, this is something that was implied a little bit in the trailer, so there's that. But I think that was where I was a little bit disappointed, because Andy wasn't that type of person where she was willing to take things in her own hands or try to show herself as someone who's involved. She's just kind of there to support Miranda, and um and that was just really it. And I think that's what made it a little bit off with her character, just because she just seemed a little bit too different from where she was in the first film. And maybe, who knows, I might reconsider that evaluation for myself. Maybe that's something that I may have to reassess in the future if I were to watch this movie. And who knows, maybe that's something that I may have to, again, kind of give a second thought of. But that's at least what I felt watching this film. It's just that she seemed a little bit off. She wasn't as of a strong character as I liked her, as I had would have imagined, and how she was in the first film. I think that alone is what really kind of dampened a little bit of my engagement with the film itself. Now, despite the fact that, I had issues with most of the individual stories, I think the one character that actually had maybe the strongest and maybe the most, I would say, the most content and the most oomph with their character arc was probably Emily. Because what's so funny is that in the first film, Emily just, was just there. She's just there to really kiss up to Miranda and get to that Paris trip. Whereas in this film, like, you can definitely see there's something lurking around, that there's something secretive about Emily that, we don't know yet, up until we get to that twist, that once we got to the fact that we understand what her real motives are. I would say that that's when I was like, okay, I actually like this. Like, this makes a lot more sense. And I think that was maybe a good move with her character arc. Like, I think she was maybe the one character that definitely stepped up from the first movie, or at least the one part of the quartet that actually stepped up from the first film. And I have to give applause to that. Again, Emily Blunt does a really great job of playing Emily, and I think that's where we really kind of see maybe the one strong individual arc that actually kind of had a little bit more juice to the actual arc itself. And so I'll give that. But honestly, with the rest of the characters, didn't have as much of a stronger arc as I would have wanted. I think that's where I would say as the issue that I found with this film. And I think it's why I'm like looking at it like a more general sense that yes, the actual story works, but some of the more specific subplots were a little bit messy. They weren't as um focused, they weren't as tight. Whereas the first film, even though the overall aspect of it may have not been as focused, the individual arcs was the stronger bit. I think that's where I think the first film does a much better job, and it's why I thoroughly enjoy more of the first film. Whereas this one, I don't really get the same sense of that. Now a couple other things. There is a Lady Gaga cameo. I think that was something that was hinted at for a long time, and that is now confirmed. I think there's like a whole report about that now, so no spoiler there. But I'm not gonna lie. I think I knew for a fact that she was supposed to be in this film, but it completely threw me off when she was eventually revealed. Like I totally was like, oh, that's Lady Gaga, and I have to say that was a great way of segueing her into this movie. I think she did like 3 songs for this film, and I'm sure that's like a way to kind of get a little bit of like the Oscar grab with that because it's original songs. She did 3 actually, but of the 3, I know there's one that came out just a couple days before the movie came out, which was like Runway, and that's the song I actually hear from the trailer, and that's the one with Doechii. But I would say the better songs are the other 2, the one that she performed on stage in that fashion show, and then the second one that's in the credits. I think those are a lot better. I think the second one that she's performing is a lot better. I think it's called Shape of Woman. I actually like that one over Runway in my opinion, but I'm sure they're probably gonna, run with Runway as like the main song that they're probably gonna campaign for with the upcoming Oscars. So that one I was like, okay, I'm sure this is just for Oscar reasons, but there's that. But yeah, overall, I think, as I said, I still enjoyed the film for what it was, especially because it does have a strong plot. And I think that alone is what makes this movie work. Whereas the subplots and the character developments were on the weaker side. Especially like the fact that we have this one part where Andy's trying to develop this romantic relationship with this guy, and it isn't as potent as it was in the first film where she had that, guy with, what was his name? Nate? His name was Nate. I do not like Nate. I do not like Nate, but it isn't as like, again, there isn't much interest in that side of the thing. Like as I said, the subplots aren't as interesting as they were in the first film, whereas the first film really hones in and making the subplots like the main focus, like making them as well developed as they can, and this one isn't as this case. So yeah, that's what I have to say about The Devil Wears Prada right there. I think that's the one reason why, I think that's a key reason why I think the first film is a lot better right now. Like if you were to ask me right now, if I were to think about The Devil Wears Prada 2, and would I ever think about, okay, I'm gonna go rewatch this specific scene from, so and so and watch it on YouTube, I would say right now at the moment, no. Like there isn't actually a single moment from the second film that I'm like already thinking, oh, I need to rewatch it right away. Whereas the first film, I always get moments like those. But again, I think it's just because it's such a new film that maybe I have to reassess that. As I said, even with the first film, like I didn't really care as much about the first film for the first couple of years until again I got a little bit older. Whereas this one's like, maybe, who knows, I might feel the same way, but as of right now in the moment, I'm not getting the same feelings that I felt with the first film, where it's like, okay, I need to watch a specific part because it just seemed like a girl boss moment. But again, it's still a very good movie, generally speaking. As I said, I will give props to the fact that this is a film that really hones in on social commentary. What's really insane is the fact that even though the quartet wasn't the strongest bit, the supporting cast or even the recurring cast, they were actually a lot more, interesting. Well, funny enough, like Simone Ashley's character, like she maybe like in this film for like maybe 10 minutes max, and she has some couple of one-liners that actually really stick out. So I like those. Like there's like the one part where she's like, who gives away Chanel? I was like, oh, I actually like that. And she's someone who's like a no nonsense person. She understands like what the actual job requires, and you realize that she understands what she needs to do. So like, okay, I actually like Simone Ashley's character. But yeah, beyond that, there isn't really a whole lot to compliment with in terms of the actual art, because I think that's where things damper a little bit compared to the first film, which again is why I think the first one was a lot better. But again, that's all I have to really say about The Devil Wears Prada. Again, I enjoyed it for the most part. Again, others might think otherwise. And again, reviews are subjective. You might actually you might be someone who actually enjoy Devil Wears Prada 2 a lot more than the original movie, and that's completely fine. But having said that, I want to know your thoughts. Having now that the Devil Wears Prada is now in theaters, it's making a lot of money. Which honestly, granted, I'm great that it's doing very well. I think it deserves that at least. I do think it is, again, considering the fact that for what it is, it's a very worthwhile legacy sequel, despite some of my criticism. It doesn't seem like a cash grab, but it is something that actually is a worthwhile experience that really reflects on how much the world has changed, and I'll give props to that. So I think that's what makes this movie work. But even that being the case, I want to know your thoughts now that the movie is out in theaters. If you have seen the new Devil Wears Prada sequel, I want to know your thoughts. What do you think? What do you not think? Did you like it or did you not like it? How do you compare this to the first film? Do you think the first one's better or do you actually like the sequel a lot more? And if so, I want to know your reasons for that. For those who maybe have read the books, what do you think about the fact that they completely, deviated from the book and went on its own unique journey that's a lot more reflective of the world? Did you like those changes, or would you have liked that the actual sequel stuck with the books? And let me know your thoughts, concerns now that the movie is out. Let me know your thoughts below. Make sure to like and subscribe.